Yesterday we were introduced to the Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol. And if you recall, sheltered instruction means that your students in your classroom, a lot of them are going to be English language learning students. And so they are placed in a regular mainstream classroom, much like special ed students are for inclusion. But with sheltered instruction and English language learners, the idea is that they will continue to learn your course content at grade level, so the grade level standards, as well as develop their English through the use of English in your specific content area. So even if you're a math teacher, a science teacher, social studies, you are still in some ways a language teacher, and that you want to pay particular attention to your ELLs and helping them to develop the use of English for your subject area. Yesterday, we talked about preparing for the lesson with SIOP. So the first 6 features that we dealt with were in lesson preparation. There are 2 more within lesson preparation that we should consider. One is, both of which are dealing with building background. One is that we need, number 7, I'm sorry, is the concepts need to be explicitly linked to the student's background experiences. And because our students are coming from other nationalities, other cultures, we really have to pay attention to that more so with our ELLs even than with our native Americans and native English speakers. Excuse me. And so some ways to do that are to give students kind of level the playing field for them on background experiences by, before you get into the topic, spinning your anticipatory set, maybe reading a picture book, a nonfiction article, maybe having them act out a small play, or read a book that's dealing with the topic. So having some thematic instruction and even cross-disciplinary instruction is really helpful for building ELL's background experiences. So if students, for example, are learning about diseases in science class, perhaps they could read a novel where the protagonist is dealing with a life-threatening illness or something similar that they're studying in their science class. And we've talked about service learning, and so service learning can do that as well, where if students, again, are learning a concept in science, then they can explore that in their community as well. Again, you're building your students from other nationalities, their background in the American culture and American society, so that they can relate more to the content that you'll be teaching that is probably American-centric, since we are schooling students in America. You could also just show a video in your anticipatory set that's going to relate to the topic. That can also build background. For example, in the ELL lesson plan that I have used in the past as an example for you, my students who created that lesson actually were teaching about, getting ready to teach about A Raisin in the Sun, a play about kind of institutional racism, individual racism, and just the difficulties of living within a white world as an African-American family that's struggling for the American dream. And so the students showed for their anticipatory set a video clip of the TV show, a sitcom called Good Times from the 1970s. And in that video clip, it was maybe a 5-minute clip, I believe, and you could see that the family had humor, but they also were, in their humor, they were dealing with a very real stress of being evicted from their apartment. So that prepared students who may be from another nationality that doesn't has never dealt with the issue of racism in America. That kind of sets the stage for them to give them a little bit of that background experience that their other classmates may have had from just living in the U.S., watching the news, and so forth. Number 3 under number 7 is more of a structured method of helping to build students' background knowledge, and it's also really good for formative assessment for you. So basically, the the steps are that you pass out a nonfiction article about the topic that you're going to be teaching. Make sure it's short. I wouldn't make it more than 2 or 3 pages, depending on the age of your students. 3 being for high school level students, because this isn't the whole lesson. It's just your anticipatory set. Have students read the article in pairs, and while they're reading, they code it on the text, so they're able to write directly on the text. They put a check mark next to a fact that they already knew, a question mark if it's something that they don't understand or they're confused by some part of the reading, an exclamation point for something that surprised them, and a plus indicating just this concept that is new to them, entirely new to them. And so you as a teacher can walk around while they're doing this and quickly ascertain what the student's level of familiarity is with the topic. And then I would suggest too collecting the insert method handouts so that you can survey them yourself. And I in the past have created charts so that I can really see across the board which facts the students already knew, which ones were brand new to them, so that we could go in more depth with them and so forth. And then number 8, then, after you have given students a chance to build their background experience on the topic, you want to link the past learning with the new concept. So keep going back to what we've learned already and make that bridge to what they're learning today. And that will give them more confidence and remind them of what they've learned, but also for things to become long-term in their long-term memory for ELLs, they need that repetition. And so revisiting the past learning periodically is going to help that more likely go into their long-term memory. Number 9 deals with thinking about their key vocabulary that is going to be emphasized. And so one thing we have to remember with the ELLs is we have to not just introduce the vocabulary, but we have to make it a central part of the lesson. So introduce it, give them a chance to write it, give them a chance to repeat it, highlight it for them to see it used in context. It just needs to keep recurring throughout the lesson. It's not something that you just introduce to at the beginning of your development and then leave it. And it's definitely not, and you may have experienced this in your own education, teachers are kind of notorious for giving maybe 10 vocabulary words or 20 vocabulary words that you have to memorize for Friday, and then you have a vocab quiz or test, and then you never see them again. That is not at all helpful to ELLs or native English speakers either. So we definitely need to, our goal should be that the vocabulary that we are emphasizing is something that the students are going to work into their speaking vocabulary and their writing vocabulary over the course of the year. So a few different types of words that you need to think about whether or not you need to highlight them. So this is going to be different for your ELLs and your native speakers. The content words all students need. So those are words that are more special to your content area. And so a lot of times those are going to be unfamiliar to all of your students, not just the ELLs. But some of those process function words are kind of like the brick and mortar. The brick words are your content words and the mortar are the fillers. And so those are just as important to the ELL to be defined as the content words, because if they don't understand the process words, then they're not going to understand what to do with the content words. Let me give you an example. When I taught English, a frequent process word that I would use is explicate. Especially when we were studying poetry, the students had to explicate the poem. So my native speakers could pick up on what explicate means pretty easily. It's a detailed explanation. However, my ELLs may not be able to make that connection quickly because they don't have the same years and years of experience with the English language as my native speakers. So explicate would be a process function word that I would make as a language objective for my ELLs, that we would need to define that for them. And you can do that many ways. One way could be if you have special words that are just for your ELLs, make them an index card with those words and a simple definition, or if possible with also a picture cue and just set that on the desk. You don't have to make a production of it so that you don't embarrass them. Just slide it on their desk, and that will be helpful to them. Also, words to be emphasized are words and words parts that can teach English structure. And so if I'm teaching the word anthropomorphism, I might focus on morph there, because morph means to change, and anthro meaning man. And so anthropomorphism is to change an animal into a human-like quality. And so I would make sure that we use those word parts to show them other words as well. So doing word study is helpful no matter what your content area is. There are also, when considering your key vocabulary to be emphasized, is to think about the tier words. And so you may hear this also in reading classes with I know Dr. Nichols teaches the upper literacy. I can't remember who teaches primary, but I think maybe Dr. Scheffler. But this is also important to consider with ELLs. Your tier 1 words are very common words. They also are more concrete. So oftentimes you can couple it with a picture, and the student will very quickly understand what its definition is. But they're also high frequency words, sight words, simple nouns and verbs that students are going to be using a lot in their language. And so if you see that they're missing a word in their speaking or their writing that is a high frequency word or sight word, make sure you pull them aside and give them that additional instruction, because that's going to be helpful for them in their entire language building, not just specific to your content area. Tier 2 words are found in school textbooks, but not necessarily in general conversation. So those are more geared probably to your content area. So we call those the Goldilocks words, which is the little picture cue that I have there for you, where she's finally found the just right bed. So they're not too simple and they're not too uncommon, but they're just right. They're important for them to learn so that they can be successful in your classroom. And oftentimes those words can even be transferred into other content areas as well, but they are more specific in academic contexts. The third are more uncommon. And so these are rarely found in school texts, and they're very highly specific. So they're probably words that we are learning here at the college level, but we don't expose students to as regularly in the high school level or lower. And so for that reason, we're not going to spend a lot of time on tier 3. Because if it's not going to be repeated in your course, then it's not really necessary to do a lot with it, other than make a footnote of it. And you'll see that even in textbooks a lot of times. They'll have a footnote of a definition of a word, but that word is being defined there, but it's not one of the vocab words for the chapter vocab. And that's because the publishers know that that is a word that the students aren't going to really need to understand future concepts. It's just a unique word. Sometimes there are archaic words that really aren't used anymore, and also they could just be very highly technical. So tier 1 and tier 2 are what you want to focus on with your ELLs. So as I mentioned, with the part of building their background knowledge and focusing on their vocabulary is that they have repetition with that vocabulary. So some best practices that we know about for vocabulary instruction are that the students need to be active in developing their understanding of words and ways to learn them. So give them strategies to learn independent words. For my son, he has a Kindle, so I've shown him how if there's a word that he doesn't know when he's reading a novel, he can just tap on that word, highlight it, and it gives a very quick, easy definition for him. And so just getting them in the habit of learning new words and wanting to learn new words is helpful. We also want them to be able to personalize the word learning. So having a personal dictionary for your students is really helpful. Now, your ELL teacher may already do this with the ELLs and have them keep it throughout their classes, where it's like a journal, and they probably have it divided A through Z, and the student goes in, and anytime they're introduced to a new word, they add it to their dictionary. However, if you could talk to your ELL teacher and see if they're already doing that. If they're not, you could have a personal dictionary for your classroom for the time that you spend with your students. And so encourage them with that. Maybe have little incentives with adding to their dictionary once a week, having so many words that they hope that they will add to their dictionary every week, or whatever you want to do with that. But giving them a chance to create their own sense of ownership over their language development is important. Another way to do that is just with mnemonic strategies. As you'll see in the next slide, I did this even with my native speakers, where we had they had in their vocab section of their notebook a chart. And so with the chart, there was a column for the word, a column for a definition that we came up with together as a class that was simplified so that they were more ready, easy. It would be easier for them to remember it if it's a simplified definition. And then perhaps where it was used in context. And last was their mnemonic strategy. And it was usually their homework to go home and think of a way that they were going to be able to remember the definition of this word. And so I gave them suggestions. They could write a little picture of it. They could tell how it relates to something else that they know, another word they know. Maybe it would be a rhyme, something, maybe just something in general it reminds them of, so that they are going to be able to remember that word for later use. Also, we want to be able to immerse them in a rich language environment. So every year that I taught, even when I didn't have ELLs, I had a word wall in my classroom. And so we just, as new words came up in their study, we added them to the word wall, and they added them to their vocab notebook. And then I had students share, or at the beginning of the class every day, while I was going around checking homework, checking attendance, dealing with absences, I had a student come to the front of the class for just 3 to 5 minutes and review off the word wall the words with them. So with that repetition of exposure, then the words were much more likely to become a part of their speaking language. And in fact, if they shared the word or used the word in their speaking while they were talking about a concept in class, like when they were answering a question or something, or in discussion, they received, quote, a brownie point, which was an incentive program I had where my classes competed against the other classes for the most brownie points. So they could earn a brownie point for their class if they're using the vocab in their language. And also I would have requirements of using it in essays and so forth as well. So they're really getting used to using the language and having repetition of being exposed to it too. So here's an example, what I was just sharing with you about the personal memory device choices. So we had the word indignation. I just picked these up out of a novel that I used to teach. Indignation, the definition is resentment. So my indignation at this charge, and they could look it up on page 10 to see the full sentence. I didn't expect them to write out the whole sentence. I don't want to be labor intensive on this strategy. Instead, I want them to just think about the way it's being used in the text. And then they get to create their own mnemonic for it. So maybe the student would write, well, it looks like dignity, so maybe it's like not having dignity, so that can help them remember resentment. And then emblem, they draw an emblem in the place. So you can see at the bottom of the slide some other examples or ways that they can decide how they're going to remember the word. But I want to put that power of the memory device in their hands because they know best how they learn. And so to me, it's just important that they take the time to do that. And so I would grade this, the memory mnemonics, but it was, or the personal mnemonics, but it was more for getting it done. To me, there's no right or wrong way to remember something. It's personal, but they end up getting graded on it by quizzes and tests and so forth throughout the school year. Excuse me. The other point I want to make, speaking of throughout the school year, is my word wall was something that was built on the entire school year. And so it was humongous by the end of the year. But they were reviewing words from even the very beginning of the school year, the very first day of school, throughout the year. So the very first day, they have the word indignation. I can tell you that they will remember indignation for the rest of their lives if they've been studying it for 180 days. Now, that's not to say that they study all of the words every day before class. Obviously, that would take longer than a whole class period. But the student that goes up to review with them can pick any of the words from throughout the school year. And so if I notice that they're focusing more on the most recent words, I'll tell them, hey, change it up. Send them back to first semester or the first quarter or whatever, so that they're still reviewing words that they had earlier in the year. Again, then it's more likely to go into their long-term memory. Comprehensible input. Now we're shifting gears from talking about language to just making sure that what we're sharing with the students, the information we're giving them, is understandable to them. So that's what we mean by comprehensible input. So one thing is that we need to make sure that our speech is appropriate for students' proficiency levels. So we need to think about a few things here. The rate of speech. So right now I'm talking kind of quickly, I would say. So if I had an ELL in the class, I would need to slow that down, my rate of speech. We also need to enunciate. And so rate and enunciation sometimes go together. If you're a real fast talker, then you may not enunciate as well as you should. So I let my students know during student teaching if I think their rate is too fast. And so that's something that you may need to work on. And then the complexity of speech. We need to think about the words we're using as well and try to simplify them for the students if we are using language that's over their head. And so again, a way to assess that is to ask your students if you need to change the language, or even have a little system between you and them where they put up a thumb or their index finger if they aren't tracking with you because your language is getting too difficult. On number 11, we need to think about explaining the academic tasks very clearly, and make sure that you always write the tasks on the board as well as going over them orally. So that will help the ELL as well. But also model the tasks that they're going to do whenever possible, and make sure that you're including visuals of the steps if possible. So using clip art or something to show them. But definitely don't just tell them what to do and set them on. It needs to be represented visually as well as orally. And something else that I would do from time to time, especially with classes where the students struggle a little more, is I would, after going over the task, I would say, okay, Joe, what is the first task that we're going to do? And have him repeat it back to me. Elizabeth, tell me the second one. Anna, the third. So that I'm sure that everyone's tracking with what we're about to do. Okay, so just take your time in explaining the academic task, write it on the board, and then go over that, what's written on the board, and have visuals as well when possible. We also need to make sure when we're delivering content that we're using different techniques to make it the content clearer to the ELLs. So with ELLs in the classroom, you should be using more gestures, using visuals, like I said, clip art and so forth, modeling for them whenever possible, previewing material together, and giving them learning in other ways. So you're demonstrating learning in other ways. So maybe with a drawing, having them explain to you individually, things like that, giving them those options as well. Using graphic organizers can be a way to review material and multimedia. So just having a variety of techniques to give them a chance to make the content more clear for them. Excuse me. Some other strategies that you'll need to use while you're teaching are having ample opportunities for the students to use learning strategies. So when you teach them how to, for example, take notes from a textbook, that shouldn't be an isolated event. Once you've taught that, you will give them more opportunities to use that strategy throughout the school year. And the same with writing. If you're teaching them how to create a concept map to prepare them for writing an essay, once you introduce it, you should be requiring it throughout the year so they really get used to using those learning strategies. Because if they use them repeatedly with you, then they're going to be more likely to be able to use them in other subject areas as well. We also want to make sure we are scaffolding instruction consistently for our ELLs, so assisting and supporting their understanding. And we'll talk about ways of scaffolding later, and you'll also see scaffolding techniques in your WIDA packet that you'll be doing for your Getting to Know WIDA worksheet. That has a lot of scaffolding techniques for you to consider when you're writing your own ELL lesson plan and when you're using it to help your ELLs. Here's number 15 is important, and it's very easy for us to neglect, both with our students that have special needs and with our ELLs. We have to make sure that we have a variety of questions or tasks that promote higher order thinking skills. 80% of the questions that teachers ask in a classroom, and this is a regular classroom, it's not even an ELL classroom, 80% of them are literal or knowledge level in Bloom's taxonomy. So we are not doing our job as teachers and really pushing students to think and use their critical thinking and higher order thinking skills. And this is especially so for ELLs and special needs, because we think we make the erroneous judgment that they aren't capable of higher order thinking. My experience, I will tell you, out of the many years I taught high school, my experience was that my inclusion classes were much more ready to think on a higher level than my honors classes. And that may shock you, or you may feel insulted by that comment because you were in those honors classes. But what I found was my honors students knew how to work the system. They knew how to regurgitate. They knew how to stay organized and structured and to be in this little box that is called school. And the inclusion kids didn't really fit in that box, but they could think. And because of that, they could think more creatively and think more analytically and deeply. And so those were the classes where I tended to have the best discussions, where they really were able to think about things in a complicated, multifaceted way. And so don't assume your students can't do creative, evaluative, and analyzing if they have a special need or if they are ELLs. We have to make sure that we are constantly holding them up to a high bar. ELLs are learning English, that's true, but that is not in any way a judgment of a lack of intelligence. In fact, they are being challenged more than your native speakers in a lot of cases. Most of your native English speakers from America do not speak more than one language, and your ELLs are. And so remember that they are being challenged, and so you can challenge them even more within your content area. Interaction is obviously important as well. Giving students a chance to be able to really interact, not just with the content, but also with others, so that they are learning to use your subject language in context in your classroom. I'm going to try to draw a visual here because I mentioned, we have to have frequent opportunities for interaction and discussion. And I mentioned, remember the gradual release of responsibility model from yesterday. That was, I think, from during the semester. So I'm not sure that my online classes know about that. So I'm going to try to draw a little picture of it for you very quickly here. It's going to be with my finger, so bear with me. But the gradual release of responsibility is the idea that the teacher gradually gets to the point where students are doing things independently. So the first thing that they do is the teacher models. Oh goodness, this is not looking good, is it? Okay, the teacher models then whatever the task is that they're going to do. Second, the teacher has the whole class do it together. Okay, and that gives students a chance. During number 2, they are encouraged to ask questions. They're encouraged to kind of think out loud. And when the teacher's modeling, actually, they too are thinking out loud as they're modeling. So then with number 2, students are encouraged to talk through it and to ask questions. Then number 3, they do it with a partner or small group. And finally, number 4, they do not do the task individually until number 4, until all those first 3 have been done. Okay? I think I just spelled individual wrong, sorry. So you're gradually releasing your own responsibility to the students. So the teacher does it, the class does it together asking questions, the students do it with a partner, and then they do it on their own. I want you to think about why that is important for ELLs. Where are they getting opportunity to use language? Hopefully you're going to say with both number 2 and number 3, they have to speak. They have to practice using English. Okay? So you have to really be purposeful with how often your ELLs are using language in your classroom. Okay? They need to be using all 4 of the language skills. Also, this model, if you are a math person, if you're teaching math, I really think this is the best model for teaching math, the best lesson plan model, where what I have found, at least in my own math experience when I was a math student, is that my teacher would model it, and then she would set us off on our own, and we would work on the homework. Model it, do it on your own. Model it, do it on your own. That's like sending your kids off a cliff, saying, okay, here we are, we're at the edge of the cliff, and this is what we're learning, now I'm going to let you go. And you expect them to jump and make it down safely. So instead, if you gradually give them the chance to practice it, maybe as a class with 2 problems, then as partners with 3 problems, and then do it on their own, they're going to feel not as helpless and have more confidence going in to the activity or the homework. So anytime I observe student teachers that are math, that is something that I usually find is they're modeling it and then sending them on their own. And so I usually suggest this method. So just keep that in mind if you're planning to teach math. Number 17, grouping configurations that support language and content objectives of the lesson. So again, you want to make sure you're not just having students do individual work, but you change things up. You have partners, triads, groups of 4 to 5, whole groups, so that they are, again, having the opportunity to really use the language and explore the content objectives with the help of friends. When I taught in Houston, I had a good number of ELLs, but I also had African Americans who learn better communally. And so I positioned my desks into tables of 6. And that was a visual reminder for me as the teacher that every single day I need to have opportunities for them to work together on something. So having those configurations in a way that reminds you that they need to be working as a team, not just individually. Number 18 is just the idea of when we are asking questions in class or expecting students to share out, that we really give them sufficient wait time, because remember, they are still probably translating in their mind before they share with you. They're not thinking in the English language yet. So something that I had to do, I had a Korean student when I taught at a boarding school where I expected students, we had a lot of class discussion because it was a literature class, and they had to speak so many times a class period to get full credit. And this particular student was new from South Korea, and so I came to her after class and said, how do you feel about the discussion? I noticed you didn't speak much. And she said, I'm having too much trouble keeping up because by the time I translate what I would want to say, another student has said it. So I needed to change my structure for that class to meet her needs. So instead, periodically through the discussion, I had the students all write down what they were, the answer to the question, and then I would call on Christina, the Korean student, first to share out, and then open it up to others. And so that slowed down the pace a little bit for her so that she had a level playing field in which to participate in the discussion. Number 19 is just the idea of giving students opportunity to clarify concepts in their first language. L1 means language 1, their first language. So giving them access to translating devices. If there's another peer in the classroom who also speaks the language, letting them sit near them, so if they need to clarify something, they can with their peer. Or if you speak the language, clarifying as well. When I taught in Houston, most of my students who were ELLs spoke Spanish, and I spoke enough Spanish that I could clarify at times for them in that language. Even though, honestly, I'm going to tell you the truth, I was instructed by my administration, we were not allowed to use Spanish in the classroom, actually. But I knew that was against my sense of what was good for the students, so I was a little bit rebellious and chose to do that. So I'm not necessarily telling you to do that, but it was something that I believed in, so it was worth it to me, and I never got in trouble for it. Okay, we also, again, have to give students ample practice and application, and that's, of course, true for all of your students, but especially ELLs who, again, are still learning the language, so the more practice they have and ability to apply it, the more it's going to make sense to them despite the language barrier. So using hands-on manipulatives and materials are really helpful for them. In the picture that you see there, those are different kinds of manipulatives. We have tons in the curriculum library. So even secondary people should be going in and asking Mrs. Harrell to direct them to manipulatives for their content area so that she can make you aware of what you can take, and you can check these things out and take them into your classroom to use for your students. They also need opportunities through activities to apply content and language knowledge in the class. So making sure that these language building activities are specific to the content that they're learning, and that they're activities where the students are highly engaged the whole time. And then activities that integrate all 4 language skills. So think about what the 4 language skills are that I'm talking about. I'm going to pause for a second and then I'll tell you what they are. The first one is, well, they're not in a certain order, I guess, but you have the reading skills and the listening skills. Those are both input skills, okay? Because the students are gaining information, they're inputting into their big brains information. So reading and listening are input skills. Output skills are their writing and speaking skills, because that is where they're sharing what they know. All 4 of those language skills need to be a part of your lesson plans so that they have a chance to integrate them and use them and practice them. And the more they practice them every single day, their language development is just going to flourish. Okay, now we're getting into the way you deliver your lesson. And so it's kind of the way they've grouped these features there's definite overlap. So don't be confused by the titles there, but just focus on the features themselves. But 23 and 24 deal with the fact that you are actually supporting their content objectives and language objectives in the actual lesson. And then I just mentioned in the last slide that we need to engage the students in those activities with the vocabulary and the concepts. The activities need to be highly engaging. 90 to 100% of the class period, students should be directly engaged. If you freeze your classroom at any given moment, how many students are engaged in the learning? Right now, if I'm giving a lecture and that's it, I'm just giving a lecture, I would say there are very few students being engaged. You are taking notes, so you could argue that that's an engagement. But if I'm asking questions in class and one student answers and we freeze it at that moment, then that means 1 student out of 25 is engaged. So instead of just asking a question and taking 1 student's response, think about using a think, pair, share. Also think about chunk and chew, which is the idea of every 10 minutes for high schoolers. I would say even every 5 minutes for K through 8. You want to stop and pause and give them a chance to chew on the information that you just gave them. So every 5-minute chunk or every 10-minute chunk, give them a chance to chew on it. I have in the past for this class, actually CRP, I would give handouts of the lecture where in the first column there was just the topic that we were discussing, and then the middle column had some of the notes with maybe some missing information that the students had to fill in. And then the third column was my favorite, and that's where they had to make the learning their own. And I had questions that directly asked them, based on this information, to apply it to their own learning. So they were questions that were geared to having them reflect on how this applied to them personally. And so that's that idea of every bit of information, I want them to chew on it, to make the learning their own. Okay, so think about how you can do that as well in your lessons. And then number 26, simply, you have to think about the appropriateness of your pacing for the student's ability. So it's the nature of the content. You need to think about the level of background knowledge they have on it and their attention span. I've noticed before, like if I see that I'm losing my students' attention, then I speed up the content, the pacing a little bit. When working with the ELLs, you want to chunk it into smaller conceptual learner units and a lot more time for them to process between the chunks. So you need to have, you might have the ELL teacher augment your instructional time for additional support if necessary. If the ELLs are going to need a little more time for the pacing than your regular students, your native speakers, then work with your ELL teacher to give them that extra time during their resource class with the ELL teacher. Ticket for their ticket out of class. So you could either give them a different one each day. So today I want you to start your ticket with I wonder, something more about the content that you taught. Or then switch it the next day to I discovered and share what they discovered today. I still want to know, and so forth. But you could also just post all of these sentence starters up on a visible place in your classroom and let them choose which one they want to start their sentence with. That's entirely up to you, or you can change it up a bit. But that will give them a chance to really review the key concept, and those sentence starters or those sentences that they're going to write for you are also going to be telling for you when you collect them and review them at the end of class where you are as a class and what they know. And with that, then, number 29, providing regular feedback to them on their output. So be specific to them. Good job is not specific, but tell them specifically what they're doing well with and what you want them to continue to think about or practice as well. And then number 30, an assessment of student comprehension and learning of all lesson objectives throughout the lesson. So how are you going to assess them? So this especially is dealing with formative assessment. And so going back to number 28, that is an example of a formative assessment where you're checking to see where they are at the end of the lesson. So the assessment should always be linked to the objectives of your lesson, and it can be informal, but still you want to make sure that you are really monitoring them in a purposeful and organized way so that you really understand where each of your students are. You can also make your assessment authentic, or that means applying it to real life. And then multidimensional, meaning you're using different ways to assess them to determine their performance. Also, summative assessment is important at the end of the unit, or when you've reached the end of building that concept. But the summative should not be a surprise to you if you're doing a good job on your formative assessment throughout, and letting that formative assessment actually direct your next instruction. So when you have students that are bombing an exam, I wouldn't brag about that. That is your failure, more so than the students. So if they're bombing it, then you need to do a better job of pacing and making sure that they're ready for the next information that they are receiving. So this is just in addition to assessment. So I kind of already talked about this, but some ways that you can use assessment to direct your lesson are even using a thumbs up, thumbs down. However, a lot of times I see thumbs up, thumbs down used a little too much. And in that regard, students aren't necessarily going to be honest in a thumbs up, thumbs down. So you have to be kind of careful with that. However, I did use it successfully in the spring semester with regards to students writing model performance indicators. They seemed confused, so I asked them to raise their hand if they were confident in writing their model performance indicators. And in one class, all but 3 or 4 had their thumb up. So I asked those 3 or 4 to come see me during office hours to clarify. But the next class, half the class had their thumbs down. So I had to stop class at that point and say, okay, let's all try to write one, and I'm going to go around and check and see how you did. And that's what we did. So in that regard, I hope you see that I use the thumbs up, thumbs down to direct my instruction. And so that's the purpose of thumbs up, thumbs down. Don't ask it. See that students, you have a good amount that are struggling with it, and move on anyway. Okay, I think that we do that too much with formative assessment. Another way that you could get more specific information is using response boards. And these are in the curriculum library for you to check out. They have both chalkboard response boards and whiteboard response boards. And so you give students the response boards, and she has class sets, so you can take them in, check them out. And students write their response on the board and hold it up at your command, and you can see very visually, very quickly, whether they got the answer or not that you were looking for. So that's great with math, science, also maybe some history if they're just general questions. Those can be really helpful. And then you could also, number 1 through 3 is more specific than the thumbs up, thumbs down, just a little more specific. But number 1, they feel confident that they, or no, number 1 is they don't feel confident that they can meet the objective. Number 2, they didn't meet it, but they feel like they're making progress. Or number 3, they are very confident with meeting the objective. And just have them put up their fingers for what they feel in their own self-assessment. We do need to make adaptations sometimes for our ELLs. And remember the article that you read, The Strangers, where we watched a day in the life of Rosa. And so think about what would have helped her with the assessments that she was given. Nothing was modified for her, if you recall. Some ways that you could modify assessment for your ELLs is the range. So looking at the number of items that the ELL is expected to complete. So if it's a math class and you're having them do 1 through 26, perhaps she could do the odds or the evens. So make sure that they are still doing all the problems they need to meet the objectives, but just maybe not as much repetition because things may take them longer than other students. Also, the time that you give them to complete the task. So they may need more time to process and break down tasks into manageable chunks. So give them the time that they need to do that, and keep in constant contact and communication with the English language teacher who will be working with them during their study hall or resource period. Number 3, also the level of support that you give them. So they may need more scaffold, something that you have to create specific for your ELs, like the vocab cards that I mentioned earlier with the process words on them, or an extra handout that they will need, or their notes handout may have more text on it and less fill in the blanks. Maybe they need a paragraph frame or a sentence frame. So you're going to have to create more work for yourself in an effort to meet the needs of your EL, but you should be dedicated to them enough to want to do that extra work. Also the difficulty, so you don't want to change the content difficulty, but the language difficulty for the task. So adapt the skill level, the type of problem, in the process of how they approach the task. So using the dictionary, simplifying the instructions, things like that. So it's, again, not that you're making the content less difficult, but the language within the content less difficult. And then number 5, the product that they provide. So perhaps if they're an earlier entering EL, then allowing drawings instead of writing if they're still very new to the English language, giving them a chance to show a hands-on demonstration that they understand it, a verbal response, translated, where they write it in their own language first and then translate it. All of those are possibilities for how you can adapt instruction. So, excuse me, 1 through 5 is going to help you with your English language lesson plan that you have to create. So keep this in front of you when you're writing your lesson plan. And remember that if you're taking this class online for the London trip, you're actually going to teach that lesson when you're in London to a class of ELLs. Does. SIOP has been adapted by a lot of school districts in the country. I don't know if I mentioned in the lecture yesterday, I think I did, but a graduate from last year is teaching in a school in Virginia where they spent 3 days of training on SIOP. He has to write his lesson plans in SIOP format, and they get graded on using the SIOP protocol. They get evaluated. So these 30 features may very well be what you are graded on as a teacher. And so it documents your lesson effectiveness, and it can zero in on where you need improvement. So the teacher can use a video or have peer coaches come in and score them. They could also have their administrator may choose to come in and score them based on the SIOP protocol. So I want you to get some experience with that protocol. It is in your course packet, and you're going to go into a video that is bookmarked on our MyGCC page and pick a video where they're teaching ELLs from the Fisher Fry channel on YouTube, and pick one of those videos and evaluate. Actually, I'd like you to evaluate 3 different teachers using the SIOP protocol. But instead of doing using the whole protocol for each teacher, for the first teacher, do the first 10 features of SIOP when you're evaluating that teacher. The second teacher, use the second 10, and the third teacher, use the third 10, just so you get experience with the protocol. So when you're observing, you can watch during the observation, or you can score them after the observation, but while you're watching the observation, you would take notes on what you're observing, or after the observation while watching a video, you could score them as well. But you want to make sure when you're filling out your SIOP protocol sheet that you include evidence where you see there's a place that says comments. So write what you see that made you decide to give them that score. Now you may not see all 30 features in one lesson, and so when that happens, you would just put a not applicable if it didn't really apply to the lesson being taught. But all 30 should be a regular part of your teaching. So even if I'm just grabbing a SIOP number out of the blue, SIOP number 20, that feature number 20 wasn't done today, that doesn't mean you never use it. It's that maybe it's going to show up tomorrow and it just might not be a part of that lesson. Okay, so again, like, it gives you a snapshot of how you're doing overall so that you can just look at the SIOP protocol sheet after someone observed you and see where you could be stronger. And for tallying the scores, you just add the lesson scores from all the features. There are 30 features, and they have a score up to 4. So you are going to, your total is 120. And count the number of not applicables, multiply that by 4, and then subtract it from the 120 so that that you're not scoring the student or the teacher negatively for those NAs. And then you can divide the number from step 2 from step 1, and you get a percentage. So you can see, are you an 80% SIOP teacher? Are you an 85%, 70%? Now, that's not really to say, it's not a punitive type of observation, but it does help you, again, to see where you could be stronger, what areas you need to work on. Okay? So, again, you're going to observe 3 teachers' videos on the Fresher and Fry channel of YouTube, and then using your protocol worksheet that it should be in your folder for this course. You're going to score them using that. Okay, and remember to write comments in the comments section that shows evidence of why you gave them the score that you did. All right, and I might use the SIOP protocol a little bit with you when I come to watch you teach in London. Again, it's not something to get nervous about at all. It's just for us to kind of have a conversation about what you're doing really well at and opportunities to get even better. Okay. All right, well, have a great night, and enjoy watching the teachers teach their ELLs. Thank you.